In the spring of 1881, under a sky bruised with storm clouds, the Wyoming plains whispered secrets only the wind could carry. Somewhere west of Laramie, where the land stretched raw and unbroken, a man named Everett Shaw rode alone. His hat was pulled low, shielding his weathered face from the first spits of rain. His mare, a sturdy chestnut named Juniper, snorted softly, sensing the electric charge in the air. Everett's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the horizon. He wasn't running from anything, not anymore, but he hadn't found a reason to stop moving, either. Until that day, when a scream sliced through the gathering thunder like a knife. Everett reined in Juniper, his heart quickening. The cry came again, faint but desperate, from a gully just beyond a cluster of cottonwoods. He urged his mare forward, hooves thudding against the damp earth. Lightning flickered, illuminating a scene that stopped him cold. A small, overturned cot, its canvas roof flapping like a wounded bird. Nearby, two figures huddled beneath a sodden blanket, their small frames trembling. And then he saw her woman, standing defiant in the rain, her dark hair plastered to her face, as she swung a broken plank at a shadowed figure retreating into the storm. "Get back," she shouted, her voice fierce, but fraying at the edges. The figure, a man, by the look of his broad shoulders, stumbled, then vanished into the gully's shadows, leaving only the echo of his boots on wet stone. Everett dismounted, his hand resting lightly on the revolver at his hip. He approached slowly, his boots sinking into the mud. "Ma'am," he called, voice steady, but loud enough to carry over the wind. "You hurt?" The woman spun toward him, plank still raised, her eyes blazing with suspicion. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 30, with a face that held both strength and sorrow. Her dress, once blue, was torn at the shoulder, and a bruise bloomed faintly on her cheek. "Who are you?" she demanded, not lowering her weapon. "Name's Everett Shaw," he said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "Just passing." Through her to scream, her gaze darted to the two figures under the blanket, then back to him. Slowly, she lowered the plank, but her shoulders stayed tense. "Vada Loel," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. "Those are my girls, Nora and Nelly. We were headed to Rock Creek when our cart hit a rock." "That man," she broke off, glancing into the dark where the stranger had fled. "He offered help, then tried to take what wasn't his." Everett's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone calm. "He'd gone for good." "For now," Vada said, her eyes narrowing. "But I don't be sure." He nodded, then turned to the girls. They peeked out, their faces pale, no older than 7, with Vada's dark curls and wide, though their eyes held a fear that made Everett's chest ache. "You two, okay?" he asked, crouching to their level. Nora, the quieter one, nodded, clutching her sister's hand. Nelly, her cheeks streaked with mud, whispered, "He scared us, Mr. You're safe now," Everett said, his voice gentle but firm. He straightened, looking at Vada. "Storm's coming hard. You can't stay out here. I've got a camp half a mile back, under some pines. Dry wood, shelter. Let me take you there." Vada hesitated, pride flickering in her eyes. She wasn't the kind to accept help easily, but the girl's safety outweighed her stubbornness. "All right," she said finally. "But I'm keeping my eyes on you, Shaw." Everett tipped his hat, a small gesture of respect. "Wouldn't expect anything less, ma'am." He helped Vada gather the girls, wrapping them in his oilcloth coat to keep them dry. Nora clung to her mother's skirt, while Nelly reached for Everett's hand, her tiny fingers cold but trusting. They left the wrecked cart behind, its broken frame swallowed by the rain, and trekked toward Everett's camp. As thunder rolled closer, Everett couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger's shadow still loomed, watching from the dark. What had Vada and her girls been running from Mand? Why did he feel like the beginning of something he couldn't walk away from? Rain hammered the earth as Everett led Vada and her daughters, Nora and Nelly, through the darkening Wyoming plains. The storm's growl was relentless, but Everett's camp, tucked beneath a stand of tall pines, offered a fragile haven. He'd built it years ago, a lean-to of weathered logs and canvas, sturdy enough to keep the wind at bay. As they approached, lightning cracked, painting the trees in stark white light. Vada clutched the girls close, her eyes scanning the shadows, still wary of the stranger who'd fled into the night. Everett noticed, his own senses sharp, but he said nothing. Trust, he knew, was harder to build than any shelter. He tied Juniper to a low branch, then ushered Vada and the girls under the lean-to. "Stay here," he said, his voice low but steady. He pulled dry kindling from a leather sack and struck flint to steel, coaxing a small fire to life. The flames flickered, casting warmth across the girls' pale faces. Nora sat cross-legged, her gaze fixed on the fire, while Nelly curled against her mother, thumb brushing her lips. Vada knelt beside them, brushing wet curls from their foreheads. "You're all right now," she murmured, though her eyes darted to Everett, searching for reassurance. Everett handed her a tin cup of water from his canteen. "For them," he said, nodding toward the girls. Vada took it, her fingers brushing his brief, but enough to make him pause. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now, though still edged with caution. "Not many would have stopped." "Most don't," Everett replied, settling on a log across from her. He pulled a small sack of dried apples from his saddlebag and offered it to the girls. Nelly took a piece eagerly, her small teeth nibbling as she watched him. Nora hesitated, then accepted one, her eyes never leaving his face. "You a cowboy?" she asked, her voice small but clear. "Rancher, mostly," Everett said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "He used to run cattle down near Cheyenne. Now I just keep moving." He glanced at Vada, who was studying him, her expression unreadable. "What about you, ma'am? What brought you out here, alone with two girls?" Vada's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. "We weren't always alone," she said. "My husband, Caleb, had big dreamsland, a homestead, a new start in Rock Creek. He passed last winter, fever took him fast. Left us with a cart, a mule, and a promise to keep going." Her voice cracked, but she steadied it. "That man back there. He saw a widow and thought he could take what he wanted. I fought him off, but not before he broke our axle." Everett's hand flexed, his knuckles white against the log. "He say who he was?" Vada shook her head. "Called himself Holt, wore a grey coat, had a limp, smelled like cheap whiskey and trouble." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "You think he'll come back?" "Not tonight," Everett said, glancing at the rain-soaked darkness beyond the pines. "Storm's too heavy, but men like that don't give up easy." He leaned forward, his voice low. "You got kin in Rock Creek?" "My sister Lila," Vada said. "She's married to a blacksmith. They've got a place near the river. We were so close." Her voice trailed off, and she looked at her daughters, who were now sharing the last apple slice. "I just want them safe, Everett. That's all I've got left." He nodded, his gaze softening. "They will be. I'll see you to Rock Creek, come morning." Vada's lips parted, as if to protest, but Nelly's small voice cut through. "Will you stay with us, Mr.?" she asked, her eyes wide and hopeful. Like a PA, the question hung in the air, heavy as the rain. Everett's chest tightened, memories of a life he'd buried flashing behind his eyes. A home, a family, a fire that took it all. He pushed them down, meeting Nelly's gaze. "I'll stay till you're safe," he said, his voice rougher than he meant. Nora tilted her head, watching him like she could see through to his bones. Vada broke the silence. "You don't owe us anything, Shaw. Why help strangers?" Everett poked at the fire, sparks drifting upward. "Maybe I'm tired of riding alone," he said, almost to himself. He looked up, meeting her eyes, and something unspoken passed between them, a flicker of understanding, fragile but real. The fire crackled, and the girls began to doze, their heads resting against Vada's lap. She pulled a blanket over them, her hands gentle but sure. Everett stood, checking the perimeter of the camp, his boots crunching on pine needles. The storm was easing, but the air felt heavier, charged with something more than rain. As he returned to the fire, Vada spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You ever think about stopping, Everett? Finding a place to call home?" He sat again, closer this time, the firelight playing across his face. "Thought about it once," he admitted. "Didn't work out. But some folks, they make you wonder if it could." His eyes held hers, steady and unguarded, and for a moment, the world was just the two of them, the fire, and the soft breathing of sleeping children. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond the pines, sharp and sudden. Everett's hand went to his revolver, his body tense. Vada froze, her hand instinctively shielding the girls. The storm had quieted, but something or someone was out there, watching. Could Holt have followed them through the rain, or was it something else entirely, waiting to strike? The fire in Everett's camp sputtered under the weight of the fading storm, its embers glowing like tiny stars against the damp Wyoming earth. Dawn was breaking, pale and fragile, casting slivers of light through the pine boughs. Everett hadn't slept, his eyes trained on the darkness beyond the lean-to, revolver resting across his knee. The snap of that twig hours ago had set his nerves on edge, though no further sound had followed. "Vada," curled protectively around Nora and Nelly, stirred as the first birds began to sing. Her eyes met Everett's, and in that quiet moment, a question passed between them: was the danger truly gone? Everett stood, stretching his stiff shoulders, and scanned the tree line. "Storms past," he said, his voice low to avoid waking the girls. "We can make for Rock Creek by noon, if we move soon." Vada nodded, brushing pine needles from her skirt as she rose. "The girls are strong," she said, her tone firm, but tinged with worry. "But I don't like the thought of that man hold still out there." She glanced at her daughters, who were beginning to wake, their small faces softened by sleep, but marked by the ordeal of the night before. "Don't you worry about Holt," Everett said, his gaze steady. "He comes near, he'll regret it." There was a quiet steel in his words, not boastful, but certain, and Vada felt a flicker of relief she hadn't expected. She wasn't used to leaning on anyone, not since Caleb's death, but Everett's presence was like an anchor in a sea of uncertainty. Nora sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Are we going to Aunt Lila's today?" she asked, her voice hopeful. Nelly, still half asleep, mumbled, "I want pancakes, like she makes." Vada smiled, a rare warmth breaking through her guarded expression. "Soon, sweethearts," she said, kneeling to kiss their foreheads. "We've got a friend helping us get there." She glanced at Everett, who was packing the camp, his movements efficient but unhurried. The word friend hung in the air, testing the space between them. Everett caught her look and tipped his hat slightly, a gesture that made Nelly giggle. "He's funny, Mama," she whispered, loud enough for him to hear. Everett's mouth twitched, the closest he'd come to a real smile since they'd met. "Glad you think so, little miss," he said, handing her a piece of jerky from his saddlebag. "Fuel up, we've got a trail to ride." As they broke camp, Everett helped Vada secure the girl's small bundle of belongings to Juniper's saddle. The mare snorted softly, nudging Nelly's hand, and the girl laughed, her fear from the night before easing under the morning's gentle light. Vada watched, her heart swelling at the sight of her daughter's resilience. But when she turned to Everett, her expression grew serious. "You've got away with them," she said. "Not every man does." Everett shrugged, checking the cinch on Juniper's saddle. "Kids see through you," he said. "No use pretending with M." He paused, then added, softer, "Remind me of someone I knew, long ago." Vada tilted her head, sensing a story he wasn't ready to tell. "Someone you lost?" she asked gently. His eyes darkened, but he didn't look away. "My sister," he said, the words rough. "She was about their age. Went well, when things changed. Haven't thought about her in years, till now." He busied himself with the saddle, but Vada's hand brushed his arm, a fleeting touch that stopped him. "I'm sorry, Everett," she said, her voice carrying a weight that needed no explanation. "Loss leaves a mark, doesn't it?" He nodded, meeting her gaze. "It does. But sometimes, you find something worth carrying instead." The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken possibility, until Nora's voice broke the spell. "Mama, look," she called, pointing to a cluster of wildflowers peeking through the grass. "Can we pick some for Aunt Lila?" "Go ahead," Vada said, smiling. As the girls scampered off, careful not to stray too far, she and Everett began leading Juniper down the trail toward Rock Creek. The plains opened before them, vast and golden under the rising sun, but the peace felt fragile. Everett's eyes kept drifting to the ridgeline, where a faint dust cloud caught his attention, too small for a herd, too deliberate for the wind. "Vada," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Keep the girls close." He handed her Juniper's reins and climbed a small rise, his hand shielding his eyes against the sun. In the distance, a lone rider moved parallel to their path, too far to identify but close enough to unsettle. Was it Holt, tracking them like a wolf, or someone else, with their own reasons to follow? Vada called Nora and Nelly back, her voice calm but firm. "Stay by me," she said, her hand resting on the knife she kept tucked in her belt. She joined Everett on the rise, her heart pounding. "What do you see?" she asked. "Rider," he said, his tone grim, keeping his distance. "But he's watching us." He turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "You know anyone who'd come after you? Someone from your past, maybe?" Vada's face paled, and for the first time, fear flickered in her eyes. "Caleb had debts," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Men he owed money to, back in Nebraska. I thought we'd left that behind, but..." She trailed off, her grip tightening on the reins. Everett placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. "Whatever's coming, we'll face it," he said, You're not alone anymore." His words carried a promise, one that made Vada's breath catch. But before she could respond, Nelly's scream pierced the morning air, sharp and terrified, from the trail below. What had she seen in the shadows of the plains? Nelly's scream echoed across the Wyoming plains, sharp and raw, cutting through the golden morning light. Everett spun toward the sound, his revolver drawn in a heartbeat, while Vada sprinted down the rise, her skirt catching on sagebrush. Nora stood frozen beside Juniper, her small hands clutching the reins, eyes wide with fear. "Nelly," Vada called, her voice trembling but fierce, as she reached her daughter's side. Nelly was pointing toward a cluster of rocks near the trail, her face pale. "It moved, Mama," she cried. "Something's there." Everett reached them in long strides, his gaze sweeping the rocks. He signaled for Vada to stay back, then approached cautiously, boots crunching on gravel. The air was still, the distant rider no longer visible on the ridgeline, but the hairs on Everett's neck stood up. He nudged a stone with his boot, and a rattlesnake slithered out, its rattle buzzing angrily, before it vanished into the grass. Everett exhaled, holstering his gun. "Just a snake," he said, turning to Nelly with a reassuring nod. "You did good, spotting it." Nelly sniffled, burying her face in Vada's arms, while Nora ran to join them, her relief palpable. Vada held both girls tightly, her eyes meeting Everett's over their heads. "Thank you," she mouthed, her voice too shaky to speak aloud. The scare had rattled her more than she'd admit, but Everett's calm presence grounded her, like a lighthouse in a storm. "Let's keep moving," Everett said, his tone gentle but firm. "Rock Creek's not far now." He helped Vada lift the girls onto Juniper's back, Nelly clinging to her sister's waist. As they resumed their journey, the plains stretched wide and open, dotted with wildflowers that swayed in the breeze. The threat of the snake hand, the mysterious rider lingered, but the warmth of the sun softened the edges of their fear. Vada walked beside Everett, Juniper's reins loose in her hand. The silence between them wasn't heavy, but it carried questions neither had dared to ask. Finally, Vada spoke, her voice low so the girls wouldn't hear. "Back there, when you talked about your sister, what happened to her, Everett?" He kept his eyes on the trail, his jaw tightening. "Her name was Clara," he said after a long pause. "She was 8 when our homestead burned. Pa was drunk, knocked over a lantern. I was 12, tried to get her out, but the smoke..." He trailed off, his voice rough. "I've been running from that night ever since. Thought if I kept moving, it wouldn't catch up." Vada's hand brushed his, a quiet gesture of comfort. "You were just a boy," she said softly. "You can't carry that forever." Everett glanced at her, his eyes raw but steady. "Maybe not," he said. "But seeing your girls, the way they look at you, it makes me wonder what I've been running toward." Her breath caught, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. "You're here now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's something." Before he could respond, Nora's voice piped up from Juniper's. "Back, Mr. Everett. Do you got a house?" she asked, her curiosity cutting through the tension. Everett chuckled, grateful for the distraction. "Not anymore," he said. "Just a bedroll and the stars. But I reckon a house sounds nice, if it's got the right folks in it." He winked at Nora, who grinned, while Nelly giggled, her earlier fear forgotten. Vada smiled, but her expression turned serious as they crested a low hill. Rock Creek's rooftops glimmered in the distance, a cluster of wooden buildings nestled along a winding river. "We're almost there," she said, her voice tinged with both relief and uncertainty. "Lila's place is just past the smithy." Everett nodded, but his eyes drifted to the trail behind them. The dust cloud from the rider had vanished, but a new unease settled in his chest. As they descended the hill, a figure emerged from a copse of willows near the river, a man, tall and lean, wearing a gray coat and leaning slightly, as if favoring one leg. Vada froze, her hand gripping Everett's arm. "That's him," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Halt." Everett stepped in front of her, his hand on his revolver. "Stay with the girls," he said, his voice low and commanding. Holt raised a hand, not in surrender but in a mocking salute, a crooked smile spreading across his face. He didn't approach, but his eyes locked onto Vada, cold and predatory. "Didn't think you'd get far, widow," he called, his voice carrying over the wind. "Debts don't disappear just 'cause you run." Nora whimpered, and Nelly pressed closer to her sister. Vada's face hardened, her fear giving way to defiance. "We owe you nothing," she shouted back, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. Holt laughed, a sound like gravel underfoot. "Tell that to the man who..." Bought your husband's marker, he said. He's waiting in Rock Creek, and he ain't patient. With that, he turned and melted back into the willows, leaving only the rustle of leaves in his wake. Everett's grip on his revolver didn't loosen, his eyes scanning the trees. He's playing with us, he said, his voice grim, trying to scare you into running straight to his boss. He turned to Vada, his expression softening but resolute. You trust me? Vada met his gaze, her eyes searching his. I'm starting to, she said, her voice steady now. What do? We get to your sisters, Everett said. But we're not walking into a trap blind. He glanced at the girls, who were watching him with wide eyes, and forced a reassuring smile. Hold tight, little ladies. We're almost home. But as they moved toward Rock Creek, the shadow of Holt's words hung over them like a storm cloud. Who was waiting in town, and what price would they demand from Vada's past? The sun hung low over Rock Creek, painting the Wyoming plains in hues of amber and rose as Everett, Vada, Nora, and Nelly approached the town's edge. The river glinted like a silver ribbon, and the clanging of a blacksmith's hammer echoed from the heart of the settlement. But the shadow of Holt's words, he's waiting in Rock Creek, clung to Vada like a chill she couldn't shake. Everett rode Juniper ahead, his eyes scanning the dusty street, revolver loose in its holster. Vada walked beside him, her hand resting on the girl's shoulders, her knife still tucked in her belt. Nora and Nelly, sensing their mother's tension, stayed quiet, their small hands clasped tightly together. Leela's place is just past the smithy, Vada said, her voice steady but strained. She pointed to a modest wooden house with a rosebush blooming by the porch, a touch of warmth in the rugged town. Everett nodded, but his gaze lingered on a saloon across the street, where a man in a black suit leaned against the hitching post, watching them with eyes like cold steel. He wasn't Holt, but the weight of his stare told Everett he was the man Holt had warned about, the creditor from Vada's past. Stay close, Everett murmured, guiding them toward the house. As they reached the porch, the door swung open, and a woman with Vada's dark curls rushed out. Vada, Leela cried, her face breaking into a tearful smile. She pulled her sister into a fierce hug, then knelt to embrace Nora and Nelly, who squealed with joy. Thank God you're here, Leela said, her voice thick with relief. Everett stood back, giving them space, but his attention never left the man by the saloon. Lila's husband, a burly blacksmith named Tom, joined them, his apron smudged with soot. You're the man who brought them through, he asked Everett, extending a calloused hand. Everett Shaw, he replied, shaking it firmly. Just doing what needed doing. Tom nodded, his eyes grateful. You're welcome here, Shaw, supper's on us. But before Everett could respond, a slow clap broke the air, sharp and mocking. The man in the black suit approached, his boots clicking on the wooden sidewalk. Holt trailed behind him, his limp more pronounced, a smirk twisting his face. Well, ain't this a pretty reunion, the man said, his voice smooth but venomous. Name's Marcus Crane. I hold your late husband's marker, Mrs. Loel. $500 plus interest. You've been hard to find. Vada stepped forward, shielding her girls. Caleb's debts died with him, she said, her voice like iron. We've got nothing for you. Crane's smile didn't waver. Law says otherwise, widow. That cart you lost, your mule, even those girls' collateral, all of it. Holt chuckled, but Crane silenced him with a glance. Pay up, or we'll settle this another way. Everett moved between Vada and Crane, his presence calm but unyielding. You're barking up the wrong tree, mister, he said. These folks are under my protection. You want trouble, you'll find it. The street grew quiet, townsfolk pausing to watch. Crane's eyes narrowed, assessing Everett. You a lawman? He asked. Used to be, Everett said, his hand resting lightly on his revolver. Texas Ranger, till I had my fill of men like you. Walk away, Crane. Last chance. Crane hesitated, then laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. This ain't over, Shaw, he said, turning away. Holt followed, but his glare lingered on Vada, promising retribution. As they disappeared into the saloon, Vada's shoulders sagged, her bravado giving way to exhaustion. Lila ushered them inside, where the smell of fresh bread and stew filled the small house. Over supper, Nora and Nelly chatted about their adventure, their resilience a balm to Vada's frayed nerves. Everett sat quietly, his eyes meeting Vada's across the table, a silent vow passing between them. After the girls were tucked into bed, Vada joined him on the porch. The night sky ablaze with stars. I thought reaching Lila's would fix everything, she said, her voice soft. But Crane, he'll keep coming. won't he? Everett leaned against the railing, his gaze warm but resolute. Not if I have a say, he said. Vada, you and those girls, you're worth fighting for. I've spent years running from ghosts, but I'm done. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay. Her breath caught, and she stepped closer, her hand finding his. You mean that? She asked, her eyes searching his. With everything I am, he said, his voice rough with sincerity. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek, and kissed her gently, a promise sealed under the Wyoming sky. When they parted, Vada smiled, a light he hadn't seen before, and rested her head against his shoulder. Months later, Everett and Vada stood together in Rock Creek's small church, their hands joined in marriage. Lila had sewn dresses for Nora and Nelly, who tossed wildflowers with glee. Tom gifted Everett a plot of land near the river, where they built a cabin with a porch that caught the sunset. Everett took work as a deputy, his ranger skills keeping men like Crane at bay, who left town after a stern warning from the sheriff. Vada planted a garden, her roses rivaling Lila's, and the girls thrived, calling Everett Pa with ease. One evening, as they sat on their porch, Nora reading by lamplight and Nelly braiding Juniper's mane, Vada leaned against Everett, her hand in his. You gave us a home, she said, her voice warm. Not just walls, but a heart. You gave me one too, he replied, kissing her forehead. The wind carried the scent of roses, and for the first time, Everett felt rooted. His ghosts laid to rest on in the Wild West. Survival often meant standing alone, but history teaches us that community forged through trust and love built the foundations of towns like Rock Creek. The resilience of women like Vada, and the courage of men like Everett remind us that even in the harshest lands, hope can bloom where hearts are open. What did you think of their journey? Drop a comment below, and if their story touched you, give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button to join our family of storytellers. Let's keep the flame of the West burning together.